Have you ever tried something and not been immediately good at it? If you're like me, you experience this constantly because you are naturally good at nothing. However, with thoughtful practice and experimentation, you can find your own way to be good at things. You don't have to fit into the mold that everyone else is cramming themselves into. You can make your own path, one that works for you. And so today on Selrahc Games, we are making more cardboard stone ruins, this time by remaking one of my original projects. And while we do that, I wanted to talk about growth, the struggles of growth, and growth as an artist. Hello there, my friends. My name is Selrahc. In the spring of 2020, I started making terrain again, and this is one of my first pieces. I envisioned it as a little stone house that had been blasted apart into ruins for the game of Mordheim. I want to see how my little skills have grown by taking the techniques I've learned and shared on this channel of cardboard stones and bricks, texture paper, and wood textured cardstock to see how we can make a new version of my first little project and to see how I've grown as an artist and a crafter since then. Like many of my projects, this one began with a base. I made a cardboard base, beveled the edges, and it's about a 7-inch square. I use a hot glue gun to assemble the ruin to glue the bricks together, but you can use whatever you want. I started by drawing a very rectangular, hopefully square shape, using this book to give me right angles because I didn't have anything else at the time. To make this blasted apart stone ruin, we're going to use a handful of little cardboard bricks and stones. I've made a whole video about the terrain technique of using cardboard bricks and stones, and I think it's pretty good, so if you want, you should check it out. But basically, these are 1-inch by a 1/2 inch pieces of cardboard. The ruler I use is 1 inch thick, so it's easy to get a bunch of 1-inch squares, and then I very roughly cut them in half. I have a door template that I've used in a lot of builds, and I use that to see where I want to put the door. I build around it, and then lay down most of the way around it the first layer of bricks. I want this corner to be completely ruined, however, so we're going to put some bricks laying down flat as though they've been crumbled apart and blasted away. For the second layer, we're going to need some half bricks, and so I just cut a handful of them in half and then glued on the second layer, alternating with each brick to give us that exaggerated sort of stone look with the big cracks. And speaking of which, you can notice that I don't put my bricks all right up next to each other. I want them to look exaggerated and have cracks and unevenness and just have a look like it could be falling apart. And this helps even more when we add in the texture paper in the detail stage, because the texture paper goes in between and fills in some of them, but it doesn't fill it in evenly, which helps add more to the neglected and weathered look. After the first layer of bricks all around, I started putting them less and less evenly, leaving gaps and holes and having parts crumbled off in corners or perhaps where a window was, and then putting more and more pieces of stones scattered on the ground as well. And before you know it, you're done with the build. Aside from leaving the big gaps in between our bricks, to add a little bit extra damage, I like to take the scissors and round off some of the edges and just make things look more broken and damaged and crumbling and uneven. And now to make the base of our ruin look more interesting, let's take some wood textured cardstock and make some planks for the floorboards. Now these are going to look seriously messed up when we're done with them. I'm actually legitimately proud of how messed up they looked. They're a little bit less than a centimeter, 1/4 of an inch or so thick. I'm not very precise. That's an interesting thing to say, and I think I say it a lot. All through my life, I never really understood myself. I didn't really know how to articulate or put into words the things that I thought and felt. And I didn't know how to look at them from an external perspective. And so I would want to be more precise. I would want to be a perfectionist and make very good quality work. I wanted to be more disciplined. And I would always fall short. I always wanted to be things that I wasn't, and so I never wanted to be what I was. And in always wanting to be different, I never even understood what I was. I never saw the good things about myself. And because of falling short all the time, I never felt like I actually had anything meaningful to give. I would have so many ideas for stories, music, songs, other pieces of art, but if I couldn't execute them perfectly, then they must not really be worth anything. Because that's what art and creative expression is about, right? Perfection. So for me, my friends, the first big step of growth came with understanding who I really was a bit more and accepting myself for who I am. My mind is chaotic. In many ways, I am a train wreck of a person, and I spent my entire life not knowing why I was the way I was, or why I did the things I did, or why I couldn't do the things I couldn't do. But as I learned more about myself, my mental health, my mental illnesses, why I struggle with the things I struggle with, and realized that I wasn't nearly as alone in the world as I always felt like I was. That last part probably made the biggest difference. Realizing that there's a lot of other people out there who have the same struggles that I do, and that all the things I thought of as my weaknesses, all the things I hated about myself and wanted to change my whole life, that I spent so many nights laying in bed and praying that I would wake up the next day and be different. These were the things that made me, me. And when I realized and accepted that those are the things that make me who I am, it was like unlocking a door and walking out of a prison that I had spent my entire life living in. Embracing the chaos in my mind and my non-perfectionist approach to work led me to experiment with crafts and terrain pieces and other pieces of art. For terrain crafts in particular, starting in 2021, I started watching these kinds of videos on YouTube, and there were some I really liked, and there were a lot I didn't. From the ones that I did really like, in particular from a YouTuber known as Bard's Craft, I took away the idea that you don't have to be perfect and precise, and that if you are a chaotic, goblin-y, rat-brained person, then be that. While watching those videos, I would always read the comments, and there were so many comments talking about how refreshing that kind of approach is. And that's exactly how I felt about them as well. Now, that particular channel mostly used foam for the crafts, but they also used some cardboard. And I wanted to use cardboard, so I started experimenting with it myself. And before I knew it, I was coming up with things that I thought were really cool and that I wasn't seeing anyone else doing. I started watching Bard's Craft videos in June 2021, and it really inspired me just to try my own thing and see what I could come up with. Of course, as it turns out, the last video Bard's Craft posted was in May of 2021. And so after watching all of those videos over the course of a few months, I saw that the channel had ended. I felt a huge hole in what I was seeing on YouTube. And so, after I kept experimenting with my own crafts, I sort of came up with my wood texture cardstock idea and made my first little shack with it. It wasn't very good, and I wasn't good at painting at all then, but I thought it was a really neat idea, and I wanted to share it. And that's sort of when I decided, from watching those kinds of videos, And seeing the comments from people all over the world appreciating and relating to that kind of thing made me realize that I could do this. And more than that I wanted to do this. And so over the next few months after that, I began the long and arduous process of making my first video. I learned how to film while crafting. Didn't do a great job of it, but still. I learned how to edit and do voiceover, and eventually how to get it to where I wanted it to be, to upload it onto YouTube. And that was the first step I took towards being an artist. That was the first time I had made something and put it out into the world. And for all its flaws and all the things I would do differently now if I was making the same video over again, I still love that little video. It's charming, it's cute, and it was such an incredible step in my life towards actually being myself for the first time. Now, the message of this video isn't go watch Bart's Craft. That's really just an example of what helped me accept myself for who I am and find my way out into the world just a little bit. Because if a strange and eccentric Finnish nerd from thousands of miles away can bring that kind of inspiration to me, then maybe I can do the same for other people. The cardboard ruin that I'm basing today's project on, one of the first pieces I made, was in fact the very first time I painted terrain. I was painting it with my girlfriend at the time. I'd made a bunch of similar pieces out of cardboard and we were painting them together. She actually had a lot more experience in general painting things than I did, and her willingness and wanting to do it is what made me brave enough to give it a try. When you first start painting things, painting miniatures, painting terrain, you tend to be not great at it. But they say that you should keep the first things you paint. Like if it's a miniature, sometimes people will think, well, I can just strip the paint off and do it again. I'll do a much better job. And that may be true, but that's not what it's about. For me at least, it's not just about the growth of how far you've come and how your skills have grown and the things you've learned. But it's important to remember where you started and where you've come from. I have a lot of much better looking and much more fun to play with Mordheim terrain now than the first pieces I made. But I still have two of them, and I keep them on a shelf where I can see them, because not only were these the first things I made when I returned back to the hobby, but these were things that my girlfriend at the time and I made together, and that meant a lot to me, because this can often be a solitary hobby, and so for someone to take an interest in what you're doing and wanting to do it with you, it can feel really special. While I might be a much better painter now than I was then, I don't want to forget my first steps, my girlfriend at the time, helping me feel brave enough to paint terrain because she wanted to do it with me. And that's what set me on the path of starting to watch hobby and terrain crafting YouTubers and learning more about myself. In the 5 years since I started making terrain and crafts and projects and art again, my skills have grown. I've become a better painter. I've had more and more ideas. I'm better at making and editing videos. But more than that, in the words of David Bowie, I believe my little soul has grown. And it all started with finding the inspiration and the courage to be myself. I owe a lot to the people who helped get me there, and my hope is that whether my videos get 50 views or 50,000 views, that I can help someone to grow the way that they have helped me. I want to give a huge thank you to the channel supporters on my Patreon page. I started it recently, and it means a lot to me that you believe in what I do. So thank you very much for the support. And thank you, my friends, for watching. Take care until next time.